Hi, everybody. We're going to continue to look at a summary of the talks from Lifeline on the book of James. We've looked at trials and how they could actually lead to growth and maturity and completeness. We've looked at temptations, how temptations in and of themselves are not a sin, but usually temptations come where we are weak and would direct us down a path that would not be good. And there comes a point where we cross a line where they do become sin. And there's a comparison James makes between trials and temptations, but God can't be tempted, nor does he tempt anyone. So if we're struggling with being tempted in a certain thing, it doesn't mean that God's tempting us at all. It means that that's probably a weakness for us, and we need to be very careful that we don't cross a line when we're tempted in those areas. And James moves on to one more theme in chapter 1 that I want to talk about before we move on to these 12 different topics James finds very important for people who are struggling, going through challenging times, but need to remember these things to live the way God wants you to live, no matter how things are going, no matter how bad things are, no matter how horrible things are, no matter how distant God seems. It's not an excuse for leaving God. James, in his mind, says it's even more of a reason to cling to God and to live the right way. So before we move on to these 12 different topics or themes, James talks about anger. Now, I know I used to struggle with anger a lot. Not when things went my way, when things didn't go my way. But when we talk about anger, I'm sure it's something we've all experienced at some point. Right, and we've all experienced it to different degrees. And we might even ask ourselves, is being angry okay? I mean, we've seen a lot of anger in our country lately over different things. Is some of that anger okay? How does anger really impact us? I mean, I just feel like we're on edge in the U.S. I don't know about your country, if you're watching from another country, but a few weeks back, I remember as I was sharing this talk in Lifeline, I pulled on the freeway and this guy was further ahead of me. He was already up at the on-ramp. And as I was waiting at the light to go by the on-ramp, two cars, they had to sort of merge together to get on the freeway. And it didn't seem like that big of a deal to me. But for whatever reason, the car behind must have felt the car in front sort of cut them off maybe. So that car honked. Well, that car honked made the front car literally stop on the freeway on-ramp and get out of his car. And as I'm sitting there at the light watching what's going to happen, I'm thinking I'm going to have to go break up a fight because this guy's angry that he got honked at, right? So there's so much that gets us angry. People, situations, experiences get us angry, but who are the ones who tend to get you angry? Maybe people who are in your family get you angry and get you hurt. Sometimes just ordering in a restaurant and being brought the wrong food, we get angry at the waiter or waitress, and all their job is to bring the food once it's ready. I mean, maybe there was a mistake in them writing it down, but maybe the mistake was in the kitchen, but we need to blame somebody. We need to take our anger out on somebody. Or maybe you're that person on the freeway who, when people have cut you off, you're used to it. But when you happen to cut people off by accident, people are so angry and they just can't control it. Or maybe if people don't listen to us. I mean, there's just so many things that could arouse an angry response or could hurt us and could lead to an angry response. I mean, when was the last time that you felt angry? What was it for, and how did you respond? And so as we look at trials and temptations, it's interesting that James sort of closely links anger to his talk about those two things. And the context, I think, we're going to understand a little better why he talks about anger in this moment. So let me read out of verse 19 through 21 in chapter 1. James says this: "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you." So James tells us these three things, right, in verse 19. To be quick to listen, to be slow to speak, and to be slow to become angry. Yeah, there was an ancient philosopher I was reading about, had this great image that stuck with me as I listened to that verse. The philosopher said, we have 2 ears and only one mouth. Our ears are never closed, and our tongue is hidden behind a closed wall of our lips and held back by 2 rows of teeth. We should be twice as ready to hear because we have twice as many ears as mouths, and we should be so much more ready to listen than to speak because we have these barriers that hold back our tongue. One aspect of anger is just keeping your mouth closed, right? Just shutting my mouth sometimes and actually listening to people more and using what God has given us to listen and to really hear people. That's why James gives us these 3 things: to be slow to speak, to be quick to listen, and to become slow to become angry. So why does you think James wants to talk about this? Because anger doesn't help us achieve the life that God wants. But Jesus got angry. Right? Jesus got angry at the temple when people were selling things. He got angry at religious leaders who were leading people astray. He got upset when people weren't treated well. He got upset or disappointed at the disciples when they didn't act on the things that they'd been taught. And he was just upset or disappointed at the state of humanity, the state of our world, and the state of people. So that's when Jesus got angry to some degree in the Bible. But why do we usually get angry? Right, a lot of times we get angry because it's something that doesn't go our way. And maybe you could use a different word for angry, like being upset or being frustrated, being hurt. But usually it's when things don't go our way, when we're taken advantage of, maybe when we're threatened, when we aren't loved, or when we're lacking in love in life. Maybe our values are violated. Maybe someone honks at us. Right, but a lot of times we can get angry for the right things, but we often will get angry at selfish things. So keep in mind, there's not just 2 results or responses to anger. It's not just we either blow up and we lose it or we suppress it. That if we look at that list, it's just if our values are violated, we should get angry, right? If our values are good values, are godly values, if someone hasn't felt loved, I mean, that should make us mad. That should make me mad if one of my friends hasn't felt loved or somebody I know hasn't felt loved. That should make me upset, right? But there's a lot of responses to anger. David got angry. Jesus got angry. Paul actually says to get angry. And the author of Hebrews writes it this way in chapter 12, verse 15. See to it that no one comes short of the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springing up causes trouble, and by it many become defiled. So if we're angry, right, if we're hurt, if we're frustrated, and we just push it down, we just suppress it, then actually it ends up creating this root of bitterness that the author of Hebrews is talking about. The author of Hebrews says that's not good. Don't suppress your anger, because it's going to actually cause you to be bitter, and it's going to hurt many people around you. So there's got to be some times where we should get angry, where maybe we might even need to get angry more often at certain situations in the world. And if we don't get angry, maybe we could actually be wrong because we're being silent or accepting certain situations in the world that are just not right. I mean, think about that for a second. If people were just accepting that mistreating God's temple was okay at that moment, and Jesus came in and he got angry. Like people were just accepting that selling in the temple was okay, and Jesus came in and he got really angry. So if somebody else had gotten angry before Jesus and did just what Jesus did, I think God would have been okay with that because Jesus did that, right? And so it's probably safe to say that person would have been right. They would have been okay to get mad in that situation because Jesus got mad in that situation. So anger could actually lead us to defend something that's good against something that's evil. That's why Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26, in your anger, do not sin. So there must be a way to get angry without sinning. It's just so often my anger is brought up because of my own selfishness. So that's why it's so hard to determine. But the 2 responses to anger aren't just to blow up or to suppress it. We don't want to suppress it because it causes bitterness. And we don't want to blow up as well because then we're not controlled. But there's got to be a way where anger is actually used in a healthy or productive way. So that's why it's interesting, I think, that we find it here in this discussion about trials and temptations, because James is saying it's not just about hearing, right? It's about doing. And when we face life, when we face trials of many types, or when we face temptations, they could lead us down two very different paths. And what I think is most interesting is, think with me, if you have a basic belief about God in life, and things don't go well according to our plan in life, who do we tend to get angry with? Who do we tend to blame? Who do we tend to get disappointed with? Because everything's under his control. So if everything's under your control, God, and you say you love me, then why are these things happening to me? And so while I think it's interesting that anger is written here, I wonder if the main reason James is including anger isn't just to help us understand it won't lead us to the right life that God wants, but to help us understand that one of our responses to facing trials, one of our responses to being tempted in life and failing and falling and being hurt, is to blame God, is to get angry at God. And that won't help anything. It won't help us to get through it at all. It won't help us to see God at all, because we would allow that root of bitterness to grow in our hearts, and that root of bitterness to grow between us and God. So maybe we need to get more angry about the right things. Maybe we need to get less angry about the wrong things. And James basically just helps us see that if we could shut our mouths sometimes and open our ears a lot more often, we would actually be living a more godly life. If we would learn to control our anger in the selfish times and release it in a godly way in the times of injustice, we would actually be living a much more godly life. If we didn't blame God for the things in life that didn't go well, but trusted God as we went through the trials of life, we would actually be more mature, and we would actually reach a complete wholeness in our lives that could never be attained any other way than trusting God when things aren't going our way, instead of getting mad at God because he's making things not go our way. So I just want to close with a verse out of Hebrews chapter 14 to help us understand that there's this desire in James to help us be whole, to help us be complete. And that when we do, we can understand life so much better. Verse 14 in Hebrews 5 says this, "But solid food is for the mature, who because of practice have their senses trained to distinguish between good and evil." I hope that one part of that verse will stick with you. Because of practice. Solid food's for the mature. It's for those who, because of practice, have had their senses trained to understand the difference between good and evil. It takes time, it takes work, it takes hard work to keep the right perspective in life, and to not get angry when we shouldn't get angry, and to get angry in the right way when we should get angry. So I hope this week you'll have a chance to think about anger and think about the way it not only impacts us, but it impacts the people around us, and it impacts the relationship we have with God. God bless.